Hey everybody, it's Logan back for another sharing video. This time I wanted to go over some interesting things I've learned while trying to use AJAX this week. The instructor challenged us to try to use AJAX for more than just loading in a string or calling up a small text file. So what I wanted to do was basically create the idea of a single page application using AJAX. So I've got my index page here, and what I wanted is all my child pages, all my navigation would be actually just AJAX calls, and they would load into this page that's already been loaded. So if I show you real quick on my previous page, there's a little bit of lag here between these links. You see a little bit of a refresh go on there every time you click on one of those. The idea with the single page application is that the majority of your page is already loaded, and you're just replacing some element with some content, some new content. So where you see this lag here, if we go over to my updated version of it, where I'm at the index, if I click on JavaScript objects, boom, it just loads the content. It doesn't need to reload the image. It doesn't need to reload the entire HTML document for the index page. You'll notice there's a little hash up here at the top, hash.js objects. And that's part of what lets it know what I've got is in my navigation. I've got some code I'll show you in a bit that tells it to run a function to go out and do an AJAX call and load the content for JS objects. And so there are some hurdles that I'm coming across, like, for example, scripts that have been loaded into the index.html page that have already executed. Do not execute again in order to apply to the newly loaded AJAX content. So, or the content delivered by the AJAX call. So where my script used to be all pretty here, all my code, because the rainbow.js file would parse through it, apply span tags and classes, and then the CSS would take over and make it all colorful. That JavaScript file has already executed, so it's not executing again. So I'm working on that, but the other issue that I did have that I was able to resolve was that the script tags that were imported as part of my HTML document were not functioning, whether they were explicitly coded right there in the HTML, or even if they were a reference to an external JavaScript file. So I'd come down here, I'd click on these buttons, and it wasn't working. Now I've got it so that it is, because I basically took all of my JavaScript external files and just loaded them into the index page. So they're sitting there waiting. So as long as it's a function that is waiting for user interaction, it'll work. If it's a function that, if it's code that executes right when the script is called in the DOM, that happens when the index page loads. And so I have had some issues with some of the functionality on my page. But as you can see, if I do, let's see. I submit that, I'm getting the functionality here of JavaScript. So, and I've got that for my DOM manipulation. Although actually, so this is another area where it's not, because all of this code here in this JavaScript, even though it's in an external file, it's not wrapped in any kind of function. If I wrapped it in a function and put a button here, and you click that button and it executes these things, it would work. But so what I'm trying to look at doing is somehow dynamically appending those script tags to the DOM at the time of the navigation click. Actually, once the page is loaded, or once the new, I don't want it to be asynchronous. I want it to follow the AJAX call. So once the AJAX call is done and it's loaded in the new content into the page, then to append that script tag. And I believe from some of the research that I've done that when you append a script tag, when you create the element and then and populate the source and then append it to the DOM, that it actually executes at that point, as opposed to if you use inner HTML like I'm using to populate these pages. I'm just using inner HTML, and all I've got, I'll show you in my code in a minute, is just pretty much pure HTML in here. It's got classes and IDs, but it doesn't have any explicit styles. I pulled all of my styles for things like my CSS stuff. I pulled that into a parent styles.css file, so that all loads when the page first loads as well. We can go look at that. We can look at animations here, and you'll notice the styles here. These are working just fine. All the CSS works just fine. Let's see. Transformations, these are working just fine. These are just static. And then transitions is not working fine because, again, it's got to do with some JavaScript functionality. It's got an event listener that right now it executes right when the index page loads, and so it goes, I don't even know, I don't have an element called area that I can assign to this A, so when you try to add this event listener, I'm trying to add event listener to null, and that doesn't work. So so that's my problem there. I've got a few hurdles to get over to get this all working right, but for the most part I have a single page application. Local data storage, I was also having some trouble because how I originally coded it, this was code that executed right away. And so that's actually been commented out of my actual code. I still have some updates to do to the documentation here as well. But I've added a couple of buttons so that if you had saved settings, you could load them. If you wanted to do new ones and save them, then you could save them, and you could go back to the home page. And that's the only time I'm actually getting a true refresh. I haven't made the home page part of the single page application. So if you click back to the index, it will actually reload everything. But if I come back to local data storage, load my save settings, there's my green. I can restore defaults. That clears out everything, unselects all the radio buttons, clears local storage, and I can show you that here, local storage, it's empty. And it sets the div back to what it used to be. So if I go blue, and cursive, and save changes, there we go, and we see it's back. And so even if we were to go back to the index page, you see those things are still there. Come to local storage, load them up, and of course the radio button select, and there's. So I'm kind of going over all the topics. I really shouldn't be. I should just be focusing on how this single page application works. But I was able to get most of the functionality on my page working. And of course, that's simple AJAX right there. So yeah, that's it. Oh, I wanted to jump over to the code. So let me pull that up real quick. So in my index file here, up in my navigation, what I have here is that the href is just that hash that I told you about. And that actually, in some of the code I've been reading, that it can be really important on how you can actually use a hash change to help trigger certain events. So I'm looking into that about how to add my script tags back in there on hash changes, or maybe I make it a part of my open URL function. This open URL takes in a location, a file name, and an element name or an element ID where it's going to go. So open URL, I'm passing it views because that's where my HTML files are located for all the content. So in this case, it's JS objects. So it's views, JS objects _1.html, and it's going to go into the div called content. So if we scroll down here, we've got this div called content, and it wraps not only the main container, but I also had to make it wrap around the footer too, because my footer changes for each page that I load, because I've got different sources or different different sources for my learning. So so those are part of these files as well. If we look down here at the bottom of AJAX, I've got my sources listed here that are different from any of the other pages. And so then we come down here to my function open URL. I take in a location, a file, and an element, like I mentioned above. I declare my XML HTTP request XHR variable. I concatenate my location and file together to make my URL. I go and get my element, assign it to a variable, although that should be, wait, do I already have that declared somewhere? I don't know, I didn't do that. Oops, it should be varl. So we'll save that. That shouldn't, functionally it wasn't making a difference, but it's semantically correct. Okay, so then as long as the URL is not blank, I open up my XHR, got my how I'm going to load the response text. Of course, if there's an error, it's going to come back and say the error. I can't get the error status to do anything other than 0, and I've seen that that's a common problem with new developers out there on Stack Overflow and other places. I haven't quite gotten any of the solutions that I've seen proposed to work yet. I'd like it to say, you know, error 404, error, you know, 501, or what, I don't know. Anything but 200, of course, would be displayed there. And then I open it, I get it, I pass the URL that I concatenated earlier, and it's asynchronous for now. I may make it synchronous if I need to wait until that response comes back before I load, before I append the script tags. If I'm going to do those script tags dynamically, if that ends up being the solution. Otherwise, you know, I just come back with an error that no page was specified. And oh, this was part of something else that I was doing. Actually, that doesn't, that's what I was, one of the things where I was trying to inject the script tags. So that was not, actually, I'm just going to leave that for now for my own memory's sake. So that's how that works. So when we click on one of the navigation links, all it does is throw a hash up in the URL, and it comes down here and executes this onClick function, which goes out and does an AJAX call to get that specific page and load it into the area that we've called content. And so that's it. I hope that gives you guys a little more insight into how AJAX can be used to dynamically build a single page application. I'm not sure I'm 100% doing it right. I feel like it was kind of a stumbling process, and there's not a lot of documentation out there on it, because most of what I find out there is, well, here, use jQuery and Angular and handlebars and all these things that I'm vaguely familiar with and have seen used at work and stuff, but I know we are not allowed to use those. They're all frameworks and libraries that make doing this kind of project much easier. So finding current information on how to do it with just JavaScript by hand has not been an easy road. So I have about 1 million tabs open right now. I plan to throw as many of my resources into my footer for this tab as possible, as well as my code. I have not even put that there as far as what I did here on my AJAX page, which I really should. I will add that in here, get it loaded to my website, thismitchellfamily.com/portfolio. And thank you guys for watching and listening, and have a good night.